Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm finally doing my wrap up for last month, for July. I read quite a few books. I read a little bit over 40 books, some historical romances, some reverse harem romances, and lots of rom-coms. The first few books that I read were part of historical romance readathon, like the second half of the readathon. I read Ravished by Amanda Quick, and this one has this beautiful step back. It was my first read by Amanda Quick. I've been wanting to read her for so long, and this one turned out to be such a fun and delightful read. I don't know why I wasn't expecting all the banter and the wit here, but it was so great. It's a historical romance with Beauty and the Beast vibes. The hero is this scarred recluse, and everyone is kind of terrified of him. They think that he killed his fiance, his pregnant fiance. I loved Gideon so much. I loved his sarcasm and his dry humor, which matched really well with Harriet's sassy stubbornness. The romance was so sweet. I gave it 4 stars. I loved how obsessed with bones Harriet was. Like, she's a paleontologist who just loves bones. She's obsessed with excavating bones in her cave, and there's a little bit of suspense as well with these nefarious people using her cave. And it's in this cave that Harriet and Gideon actually end up in a compromised position, so it also has a marriage of convenience. I just had a lot of fun reading this one. I'm so glad I finally read Amanda Quick, and I can't wait to read more from her. My next 2 reads were both by Grace Calloway. I read Her Wanton Wager, which is book 2 in her Mayhem in Mayfair series. This one is my favorite of the series so far. The heroine Persephone, Percy, her brother, is in debt to the hero Gavin, who is this infamous owner of a gaming hell. He makes her a deal, a wager, that if she can resist 7 nights of seduction with him, then he'll free her brother from his debt. Percy, of course, takes the wager because she thinks it's going to be a super easy win, but there's some really good chemistry between these two. As always with Grace Calloway books, it's a very steamy historical romance. There's a good dose of mystery and suspense with Gavin trying to get revenge on the man who wronged him. It was a really good historical romance, and I gave this one 4 stars. I read the next book in the series, Her Protector's Pleasure, which I gave 3 stars to. It's a single mom historical romance. Marianne is this wealthy widow, but she's also got a questionable reputation because she goes into some places that aren't meant for ladies. But she does this because it's the only way to try to find out what happened to her kidnapped daughter and try to get her back. Ambrose is the police officer hero who does everything he can to provide for his family. His newest assignment is to investigate Marianne. I liked both of their characters. I thought they were strong kinds of characters, but I did have a hard time connecting with both of them. I wasn't all that invested in the romance or with the whole kidnapped daughter plot either. Most of the romance is Marianne learning to trust Ambrose with the truth about her daughter. It was an okay read. I definitely didn't love it quite as much as the second book. My next historical romance read was For the Duke's Eyes Only by Lenora Bell. This is book 2 in her School for Dukes series. I've only read book 3. I've been reading this series completely out of order. I really love the premise of this one. It was a recommendation from Lisa, Remarkably Lisa. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It's a historical romance between childhood friends. They promised to always be with each other, but Daniel ended up leaving Indy because he inherited the dukedom at a really young age. Now they're all grown up. She is an archaeologist and he is this antiques hunter, and they kind of hate each other. They're both forced to work together to recover the stolen Rosetta Stone, and I did really like the first half of the book. There's lots of good tension between these two, lots of unresolved feelings, but I think in the second half, once they fall into bed pretty easily and quickly, it just kind of flatlined for me. It just wasn't as invested anymore, so even though this one could have been a 4 stars, the second half did bring this down to 3.5 for me. I ended the readathon with quite the disappointing read. This is The Mysterious Society of Lady Scoundrels by India Holton. This had the potential to be such a great read, but I just could not deal with the writing. I mean, it's about this lady pirate society. The heroine is one of its members. The hero is an assassin hired to kill her, but he falls in love with her at first sight. But the writing made it really hard to get into the story or even to enjoy it. It was just too quirky and all over the place, so I gave this one 2 stars. I did end up reading another historical romance right after the readathon, and it did make up for my last read because because I love this one. It's Annie's Song by Katherine Anderson, and this one has a beautiful 2-page step back. So I read this one for an upcoming video that I have planned that I haven't finished yet, but I already talked about this book quite a few times in my last few videos. I loved it. It's one of my new favorite historical romances. A lot of people on YouTube did recommend it to me, and I'm so happy I finally read it. It is such a sweet romance with the nicest guy hero. If you love good guy heroes, Alex is perfect. So this is a Western historical romance with a rancher hero. There's a marriage of convenience. Annie is our deaf heroine. No one knows she's deaf though, and no one can understand her. She is raped in the prologue by the hero's brother, so you can skip the prologue if you don't want to read about that, but Alex, our hero, does step in and offers to marry Annie. It's a really slow romance. It takes a while for Alex to even learn that Annie is deaf, but once he does, he just wants to give her the world, give her everything that he has, and it's so sweet. Alex's devotion was just the most perfect thing. I love it so much. I give it 5 stars. I then read 3 Olivia Dade books. It was my first time reading her. I've been wanting to read her ever since I saw this cover for Spoiler Alert, and I did end up reading it. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was pretty close to a 4, but I listened to the audio and I think that was a bad idea. It kind of brought it down for me because there are a lot of messages, lots of texts and scripts in this book that just didn't really translate all too well in audio for me. It is a really cute story though. It's got an actor hero who is on a show that's pretty much like Game of Thrones. Marcus is also in the fanfiction community, fanfiction for his show, and no one knows that he is the poster who doesn't like his character. April is a heroine who is into cosplay and fanfiction as well. She gets noticed by Marcus on Twitter, I think. They end up going on a date together and slowly falling for each other, but Marcus does hide the fact that he has this other online identity from April. I've never been into fanfiction, but I did think that reading about it was a fun experience, so I did end up liking this for the most part, and I did end up reading 2 more Olivia Dade books. The next one was Sweetest in the Gale, which is this collection of 3 novellas. I gave this one 3 stars overall. Each of the novellas were cute, but not too memorable. They're all set in this small fictional town, and 2 of the novellas are about teachers. The first novella is called Sweetest in the Gale. The heroine here, she has recently lost her sister, so she's dealing with that grief, and she ends up connecting with a fellow teacher over that grief because he's experienced something really similar. They end up working on a poetry project together and falling for each other. The second novella is called Unraveled, and it's got an opposites attract kind of romance. The heroine is very quirky and carefree, and she loves to make murder dioramas in her free time, and the hero is her complete opposite, someone really cold and uptight. The last novella is called Cover Me. It's got the friends to lovers trope and a marriage of convenience, which means it should have been my favorite, but it was just way too short for me. The heroine finds out she has a lump in her breast and she has no health insurance, so her best friend offers to marry her so that she can get covered under his health insurance. This one went by way too quickly for me. Like, by the time that I finished it, I couldn't believe it was over. But still, if you're in the mood for some small town romance novellas, you could try these ones. And my third Olivia Dade book was 40 Love, which is her tennis romance. This one is my favorite of her books so far. I give this one 4 stars. It's got an age gap with an older heroine. Tess is on vacation and she meets Lucas when her bikini top accidentally falls off and he saves her. He's a former tennis pro and also about 14 years younger than her. I had a fun time with this one. I love their meet cute. It was just a really great vacation romance. I then read one of my anticipated books of the year, which is Exposed by Kristen Callahan. This is book 4 in the VIP series, her Rockstar Romance series. I love this series, book 2 especially, but I did really enjoy this one as well. I gave it 4 stars. This one is about Rye and Brenna, who have been teased throughout the series. They do not like each other. They don't get along. Rye is the band's bassist and Brenna is their PR person. But even though these two don't like each other, there is some good chemistry between them because when Rye overhears hears Brenna talking about wanting some good intimacy, he offers himself up. They start up this affair that they try to hide from everyone in the band, and it turns out they actually really like each other. I just really like the way that these two were around each other. I loved how Rye paid so much attention to Brenna. It was another great read in the series that I totally adore. And we do have one more band member left who doesn't have his book, so hopefully we get that one soon. Next, I read Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. I gave this one 3 stars. I did really want to love it more, but it was surprisingly the romance that I just wasn't into. I knew going in that this book wasn't really like a romance, but I did expect a lot more than the bare bones that I got. I never really connected with Grace's new wife, the wife that she accidentally ended up getting married to in Vegas. So again, it's not a romance, it's more of a coming of age story for an adult. Grace has just gotten a PhD and she's having a hard time trying to enter into the workforce. She slowly realizes that her current track in life might not be what she actually wanted, and it might have been more something that was expected of her by her parents, by everyone else. So she just learns how to love herself, take care of herself, and do what she wants in life. I did enjoy this part more than the accidental marriage, but I still struggled with the story just a little bit overall. I read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, which I loved. I gave it 4.5 stars. I'm mainly hesitating to give it a full 5 because I do have some other Tessa Bailey books that I love, but this is still pretty high up there. I had so much fun with Piper and Brendan. It's one of my new favorites of the year. Piper is inspired by Alexis from Schitt's Creek, which is a show that I loved. I binged it last year. It was so good. So the heroine is basically this socialite who has never worked a day in her life. She's just been cut off by her stepfather and she's forced to move into this small coastal town and try to make something of herself. She ends up renovating the bar that she's inherited from her father, her late father, and she falls for a very gruff fisherman named Brendan. Brendan is your fairly typical Tessa Bailey hero. He does think at first that Piper doesn't have what it takes to make the bar something, but he soon realizes that he's wrong and he very quickly starts to fall for her. If you don't like insta-love and steam, Tessa Bailey's books are probably not gonna be for you, but I love both of these things, so I love this book, and Brendan was just so perfect in the way that he would totally do anything for Piper. I did just also finish up the arc for book 2, which is about Piper's sister Hannah, who helps her renovate the bar, and Brendan's best friend Fox. It's a friends to lovers romance. I do have some thoughts on it, but I'll probably save it for my next wrap up. And right after I finished It Happened One Summer, I read another Tessa Bailey book. I finally read the 3rd book in her paranormal romance series, the final book in her Phenomenal Fate series, Today, Tomorrow, and Always. The series has been okay. It's not like the best vampire romances that I've ever read, but I mean, I like them for the most part. This one I gave 3 stars too, so it's a fairly average read for me. I liked Tucker and Mary, but I never fell in love with their characters or their story. Tucker is our vampire hero, and he's actually a thicker kind of hero. He definitely does not have a 6-pack. He finds his mate in Mary, who is a blind fairy, but she's been promised to another vampire in order to save her people. It's kind of a road trip romance. Tucker drives Mary to her fiance to get married, even though it pains him to do so because he knows that she is his fated mate. The book is pretty fast-paced and most of the action happens towards the end of the book. The world building isn't the best, but it was still a cute ending for the entire series. I read a couple smutty novellas this month. The first one that I read was Forbidden Fling by Kat Taylor, who is also known as Katie Robert. I really expected to love this one, but I only give it 3 stars. The heroine cheats on her boyfriend with his dad. The boyfriend ends up being a bad boyfriend, which I didn't really see the point of. There's no happily ever after here. The smut was only okay. That was the most disappointing part for me. It was kind of repetitive, like the phrase dirty slut was used like 20 times. So that kind of got old after a while, and I'm just really sad that I didn't love this more. I then read a Jessica K novella, of course. This one I did enjoy. I gave Caught by the Convicts 4 stars. stars. The version heroine finds herself in the middle of a prison break of all things and is caught by two convicts, our two heroes who want her and want each other. It's Jessica Cain's first MMF romance, and I did like that one of the heroes is a virgin too. Next I read a new to me author, Just a Heartbeat Away by Cara Bastone. I really liked this one. It was a really emotional small town romance. I gave it 4 stars. It's got an older single dad hero who falls for his son's former preschool teacher. Sebastian was widowed when his son was really young, and Via, the heroine, ended up saving him when he needed it. They reunite when Via works at Maddie's new school. It is very, very slow burn. Via has a boyfriend throughout a lot of the book, and Sebastian himself is learning to slowly get back into the dating game. He does hold off from pursuing anything with Via, not just because of a boyfriend, but also because he thinks that he's too old for her. It's also a friends to lovers romance. They develop this really great friendship together. I loved how sweet and slow and heartwarming this was. If you love small town romances with lots and lots of feels, I highly recommend this one. My next read was Ruthless Creatures by J.T. Geisinger, which I gave 3 stars to, which is pretty surprising because I generally do enjoy her books. But this one was the kind of insta-love romance where I didn't really get why these two fell for each other. The hero moves in next door to the heroine and they kind of immediately start going at it, even though Natalie was supposedly super devoted to her missing boyfriend. But it has been years, so I can't really blame her. Natalie knew going in that she could never fully have Olive Cage, but she still accepts it, still takes him like 3 days out of the week. He's a very mysterious kind of character. He goes on these trips and doesn't even see Natalie for like half the week every week. So I never really got into this romance. It was just okay. It's very light for a mafia romance, so I was kind of disappointed by this one. I then tried to read a reverse harem romance called Restless Spirit by Brianna Michaels. I did not like this one. I gave it 2 stars. I was really excited too because like as soon as I saw that it was a paranormal reverse harem romance, I wanted to read it. It's got a ghost heroine, but sadly it was just way too similar to Four Psychos by Christy Cunning. So honestly, I kind of knew what was gonna happen because of that book. Everly is the ghost heroine that no one can see until finally one guy does. He takes her back to his house and it turns out that he is part of her harem, that he knew her before she lost all her memories. He's one of 4 guys who I don't even remember. They were that forgettable. I just didn't really care about this romance and the writing was so bad, like very cringy. So I just did not like this one. And then I read Anne of Manhattan by Brina Starler, which is a contemporary modern retelling of Anne of Green Gables. It's set in New York City and it was just really cute. I loved Anne and Gilbert here. They knew each other growing up and they picked on each other a lot, but on their last day of high school they kiss each other, but Anne thinks that it's a prank by Gil, so she ends up ghosting him for years. They reunite in grad school where they're forced to partner up on a project together and they slowly fall for each other. I really like that we got both of their point of views. I loved how Gilbert was basically just pining over Anne through all of his chapters. So if you love Anne of Green Gables or Anne with an E, definitely try this one. My next read was another reverse harem romance, but this time it was much better. I read the 2 books and the Lola and the Millionaires duet by Catherine Moon, and besides it being reverse harem, it is also Omegaverse. It was my first time reading an Omegaverse romance. I've heard of the term before, I kind of knew what was going on, but still, it was a pretty interesting experience. I don't know if I love Omegaverse after reading this, but I did like this duet. Omegaverse is basically this alternate universe that can be paranormal, but this one is contemporary. There are 3 kinds of people in the world: alphas, betas, and omegas. Our heroine Lola is a beta, which she doesn't really like because betas are the most normal ones and the ones that people don't want. And because Lola always wanted to be an omega, she was abused by some alphas. The start of this book, the start of this duet, is Lola with PTSD from her experience with those alphas. So she has a hard time being around alphas. She meets a beta that she connects with, a beta who has his own pack, alphas and an omega, and Lola slowly starts to fall not just for him but his entire pack. There are 6 guys in this reverse harem, 4 alphas, a beta, and an omega. Only 2 of the guys are straight, the rest all love to play with each other, and they all love to be with Lola. It was a really interesting read. I did really like it. The first book focuses on Lola dealing with her PTSD and growing close to this pack, and the second part has a little bit more suspense and action because those previous abusive alphas are back. A lot of people recommended this duet, or at least they recommended part 2 when I made my reverse harem video, so I'm glad I read it, and I'm actually really excited for a third book, a third Omegaverse romance from Catherine Moon, which is coming out later this year. I read 2 Christina C. Jones books. The first one is Release Me If You Can, which is book 2 in her If You Can series, her romantic suspense series. Even though this book focuses on a new couple, you definitely can't read the series out of order. All 3 books follow the same storyline with the same bad guy. Here we have a special agent heroine and a hacker hero. At the end of book 1, we just found out that Renata kind of is a traitor. Well, everyone thinks that she's a traitor, and she has some trust to earn back, especially trust from Quentin. The 2 of them do have to work together though to take down the bad guy along with the first couple. I did end up liking this one a little bit more than book 1, so I give this one 4 stars. My other Christina C. Jones book was I Think I Might Love You. This is a rom-com novella that I gave 3.5 stars to. It was really cute and fun, but just over way too quickly. I love the meet cute, which was hilarious. The heroine shows up at her sister's apartment only to find out that this guy is living there and that he's naked. Jacqueline ends up punching Caden, and she sees him again when she takes in this stray cat to a vet. There's some fake dating here, some good banter. I really like this one, but I do wish there was a little bit more to it. Next, I read Last Guard by Nalini Singh. I give this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's the newest Psy Changeling Trinity book, book 5 in the series. We have a romance between 2 Psys here. Both of them are Designation A. They form this new group to basically save the Psy race, and I love the fact that Pyle and Kanto, the main characters, they knew each other when they were kids. They were put together with people who hurt them, but they saved each other. They never saw each other again though, but they do finally reunite as adults. They're just so great together. Pyle is like your ice cold heroine, and Kanto just pretty much does everything he can to break down her walls. I really enjoyed this one. I loved being back in this world, and I already can't wait for more. I then read The Stand-In by Lily Chu, which I gave 4 stars to. It's a celebrity romance that's really fun, but also down to earth. We have a heroine who stands in for this famous celebrity because she looks just like her. Grace, our heroine, takes this offer because she needs money for her mother. She ends up forming this really great friendship with this actress, with Fong Li, and she falls for Fong Li's friend, who everyone thinks is her boyfriend, but he's not. Sam is one of the sexiest men alive, and they at first don't like each other, they don't get along, but he does end up helping Grace to get into her Fong Li role. So they grow closer, and it's really cute. I just had a fun time with this one. It's a very entertaining book. It's really great in audio. I read The Wedding Game by Megan Quinn. It's this cute and quirky rom-com with a DIY expert and a jaded divorce lawyer who both compete in this reality show competition to create the dream wedding for their brothers. It's an enemies to lovers romance with lots of banter and bickering. Luna and Alec have a lot of great chemistry on and off set. They end up in a secret relationship that they try to keep from the TV crew and also their brothers. The brothers and their families were really great secondary characters. It's a really great read if you love rom-coms, if you love reality show competitions, a lighthearted romance, and strong family ties. I read 4 Lisa Kleypas romances, historical romances this month, mainly because of a video where I compared her newest release to her oldest published book. The first one and her debut is Where Passion Leads, which is book 1 in her Berkeley Faulkner series. This one is very much a bodice ripper from the 80s. The hero rapes the heroine here and spends the rest of the book trying to atone for what he did. I knew about it going in, so I did prepare myself for it. After what happens in the first 2 chapters, Rand and Rosalie are forced to go to France together, and it's here that Rand changes himself, turns from someone who was cold and selfish into someone who loves and cares about someone. He would do anything for Rosalie, but she does absolutely make him work for her love, her respect. I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this one. It was just a very interesting read, definitely a product of its time. I did still enjoy it for the most part. I gave it 4 stars, which was very surprising. The second book in the series I sadly did not enjoy as much. I gave Forever My Love 2 stars. This book is about the maid from book 1, but it's been 5 years and she's now a mistress. She's a mistress for this older lord, except not really. She never actually sleeps with him. She just pretends to be one around his friends. Mira ends up meeting the Duke hero Alex at a house party, but he is very cold and judgmental because she's a mistress. He's just really rude and I never saw why she fell for him. He's an unlikable character for me throughout the entire book. He doesn't really put that much effort into the romance. Mira herself, she was okay until the very end where she does something really dumb. So I just had a hard time with this one and did not like it. My next Lisa Kleypas romance was Love Come to Me, which is one of her romances set in America. I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I just loved the hero Heath so much. He's this southern charmer who was totally focused on the heroine. Heath would charm and tease Lucy all the time and it just made me smile so much. Heath ends up saving Lucy's life one day when she falls into a frozen river. She does stay overnight at his place even though she does have a fiance. She tries to keep this a secret, but Heath is just very determined to show Lucy that he is the right guy for her. Heath totally stole my heart in this one. I was swooning over everything that he said and did. I will say the second half is not quite as good as the first, but I still loved it overall. And the last of the old school Lisa Kleypas romances that I read was Give Me Tonight, which I gave 3.5 stars to. It's a Western romance with a rancher hero and it's got time travel. The heroine goes back 50 years to the 1880s and she replaces the Addie of that time. It's kind of an enemies to lovers romance between Addie and Ben. He hates her because the previous Addie was an awful person and this Addie thinks that Ben killed her father of the 1880s. So she tries to stop this murder from happening all while falling for Ben. I really like the premise of this one. I love time travel, but I do wish that we got more from the hero here. Usually with Lisa Kleypas we get a fairly even number of chapters from the hero and heroine, but here we never really got the hero's point of view, and that's pretty much the reason why it's not quite a 4-star read for me. Next I read Song of the Forever Rains by E.J. Mello. This is a fantasy romance that's on KU. I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay. I kind of got bored for a lot of it and most of the action happens at the end of the book. The world building isn't the greatest. I still don't really have a solid grasp on it. It's a series that focuses on 3 sisters. This first sister is Lark. They're basically protectors of their kingdom and Lark is tasked with investigating this rival kingdom. She pretends to be a potential bride for that kingdom's duke and she ends up falling for the duke's son. I wasn't a big fan of this romance. It just wasn't interesting or engaging, but I did really like the relationship between the 3 sisters, so I am at least curious enough to continue with the series. I read 2 Alyssa Cole books this month. First one is Signal Boost, which is the second book in her post-apocalyptic romance series. I gave this one 4 stars. I liked it more than book 1. It's a world where technology and electricity just doesn't work anymore. This book is an MM romance about the hero's brother from book 1. Our hero here catches our other hero stealing from them. John's family is pretty much ready to shoot Mikhail because in this world you definitely have to shoot first, ask questions later, but Mikhail explains that he's trying to figure out why this world has gone to hell. He's pretty much a big nerd who tries to find out why the apocalypse happened, and John goes along with him as he travels to his old university to find answers. There's a lot of good forced proximity here. It's kind of like a road trip romance, but post-apocalyptic. There's lots of awkward flirting from both of our heroes. It was a really cute romance. I'm excited to read the final book, but I'm just currently waiting on my library to get it. My other Alyssa Cole book was How to Find China Princess, which I sadly did not enjoy. I gave it 2 stars. It's an FF royal romance that was kind of underwhelming. It is a very slow burn, like so slow burn that almost nothing happens until the very end. The heroine Makeda is this supposed long lost royal, and Bez is an investigator who shows up in her life to try to get her to claim her title. Their slow burn romance was so dragged out, and a lot of it takes place on a ship where they're traveling to the heroine's royal country. I just sadly wasn't invested in the romance. The whole princess thing was also not that interesting. It's a really long book, almost 400 pages, where not much really happens until the very end, and by then I was just not interested anymore. My next read was one that was recommended to me quite a few times in my YouTube comments and on Instagram. It's The Dare by Harley LaRue. I read another Harley LaRue book a couple months ago, Her Soul to Take, and I really liked that one. So when a lot of people recommended this one to me, I decided to give it a try. It sadly wasn't really for me. I give it 3 stars. It's a new adult college romance novella that takes place over the course of one night. It was a strange read. Definitely not my thing. It's got the humiliation kink. The main characters were high school classmates. Jessica was like this popular cheer squad captain, and Manson was the outcast. They reunite at a college party. Jessica loses a bet to Manson, and she has to be his slave for the rest of the night. They get into some kinky things where Jessica has to humiliate herself for Manson, and she does like it, but I just did not really vibe with it. There's a scene with clowns, and it does end on a happy for now note. I think the author is supposed to write another book for them or another novella. I might end up reading it just to see how it goes, but yeah, this one was not really my thing. I read a chick lit book, Dream a Little Dream by Susan Elizabeth Phillips. It's book 4 in her Chicago Star series, which I've been slowly making my way through. I really like this one. I gave it 4 stars. It's a very emotional read. We have a single mom for a heroine. She's widowed and she is broke. She and her young son are living in her car. She is desperate for a job, and she ends up finding one while forcing her way into one, working for the hero Gabe at his drive-in. Gabe is widowed himself. He's a very tragic kind of character who lost his wife and son, so he kind of hates everyone, including the heroine. He even has suicidal thoughts. He's in a really bad place, but he does slowly open up to Rachel, to the heroine. Like I said, it is very emotional, very hard-hitting. It's a slow romance between 2 broken characters, and I really liked it. I then read Hang the Moon by Alexandra Bellfleur. It's the standalone sequel to Written in the Stars, which I really enjoyed. I also like this one. I gave it 4 stars. It's a sister's best friend kind of romance. The heroine is best friends with the hero's sister. Annie shows up in town out of the blue, but her best friend is not there. So Brendan is the one who shows up to help her get settled temporarily before she leaves the country for a new job. She is very surprised by how much Brendan grew up and how hot he is now. Brendan himself has had a huge crush on Annie since he was young, and now he sees this as his chance to woo her. They go on these little dates all around Seattle, and it's so cute. There is of course an end date that they have to figure out, but it was so sweet. I really love these 2 together. They made such a cute couple, and I had a lot of fun reading this one. My next read was The Raquel of Roth by Amelie Howard. This is book 2 in the Everly Sisters series, a historical romance series about 2 sisters. I really like The Beast of Bezek, but this sequel was only 3 stars for me. It was okay. It's a historical romance about a married couple. Isabel and Winter married a few years ago, and right after their wedding day, Winter dumps Isabel at his father's estate and leaves for London. They don't really see each other in the next few years, and finally, in present day, Isabel is fed up with it. She doesn't like that Winter always makes the headlines for being a scoundrel, so she goes to London to make him beg for her forgiveness. So I really wanted to like this one, and I totally appreciate that both the main characters were celibate during their separation, but I just did not feel the love between these 2, and Winter was kind of lame for a hero. His motivations for staying away for years, for pushing Isabel away for years, was was pretty dumb, and he definitely should have groveled more for pushing her away for so long and making her feel unworthy. So this one sadly just wasn't as good as book 1 for me. I read a fantasy romance, A Promise of Fire by Amanda Boucher. This is the first book in a trilogy and I loved it. I gave it 4.5 stars. This was so much fun to read, lots of good action, the romance was swoony. I mean, yes, it does start with some kidnapping, but I loved it. I love a good sassy heroine, and Kat is basically that. She's kidnapped by Griffin and his guards and taken away to his kingdom because of her powers. You can tell very easily that Griffin is into Kat, kidnapping notwithstanding, and they have some really great banter together. She definitely makes his life hell while they're on the road. The world was really interesting too. I liked the setup of it. It's not too info dumpy. It does leave us though with quite a few questions that hopefully are answered in the next 2 books, but I really liked it. It was a fantastic start to this fantasy romance series. I read the final Filthy Rich book by Angelina M. Lopez, Serving Sin. It's a bodyguard romance that takes place quite a few years after book 1. Roman, the hero, works in security and he actually saved the heroine's life over a decade ago. He saved Sin, he found her after she was kidnapped, and she's never forgotten him. Now she's all grown up and CEO of her family's company, and she hires Roman as her new security. She's wanted him since he first saved her, and the chemistry between them is so good. They do talk about the trauma that Sen went through from her kidnapping. There's lots of good forced proximity with him being her bodyguard. I really like this one. I give it 4 stars. It's not my favorite of the series, but still really solid. And I'm sad the series is over now. My last 3 books were all Katie Robert books. I read the first 2 books in her vampire reverse harem romance series. Sacrifice is book 1. I gave this one 4 stars. It's pretty much 150 pages of vampire smut and I liked it. It's a novella that introduces Mina, our half human, half vampire heroine, and our 3 vampire heroes, Malachi, Wolf, and Rylan. She's dumped by her father in Malachi's house to pretty much be his blood bank and also to breed with him. The 2 other vampires show up and they all get kinky with each other. There's not much plot or world building, but I still did like it. Book 2 is Air, which I gave 3 stars to. I didn't like this one quite as much because it just felt like filler to me. There's more steam, but not much really happens or progresses with the plot, with Mina trying to get revenge on her father. I found that Katie Roberts' world building is not the greatest. There's just not much of it in this series or in any other series that I've read from her. So this one was an okay sequel. Probably could have gone without it and just gone straight to the final book where everything happens. And the last book that I read last month was The Bastard's Betrayal by Katie Robert. It's a mafia romance, the start to a new series that's also a spin-off of her previous mafia romance series, The O'Malleys. This one is about the second generation, about 4 sisters, the Romanovs. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It is very close to a 4, but I did have some problems with it. Our heroine Rose is the oldest of her sisters. She's the heir of her mafia family, but we don't really get too much about that. We're only told about this and it's never really shown how badass she is. She has a normal boyfriend who she's fallen in love with, but it turns out he's been lying to her. His real name is Dante and he is part of the mafia in LA. She breaks things off with him, literally shoots him, and gets engaged to the boss of an ally family. Dante ends up kidnapping her on her wedding day because he's not about to let her marry someone else. He knows that Rose is it for him and takes her away to this middle of nowhere cabin. I really liked Dante's single-minded devotion to win Rose over and to make her fall back in love with him. But there is not actually that much mafia stuff happening in this book. It's more politics and discussion, which is not all that exciting. And most of the book is Dante and Rose at that cabin, not really doing much. So this could have been a 4, but I did expect a little bit more from it. So 3.5 for me, but if you do like your mafia romances that aren't too action heavy, this one would be great. That is it for this July wrap up. Let me know your thoughts if you read any of the same books. Links to them will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all next time. Bye!